Hello, you are with Astrology Beyond, and today we have gathered to talk about a very interesting topic here with Daniela Vitanova, who is a specialist in astrology, psychology, and journaling. We will be talking about children and how to guide them towards certain sports, how to play out their Mars, and in what way, the energy of this Mars can be channeled and selected. We choose the most suitable sport for each child so that they can release their energy in the smoothest possible way and not retain aggression, which is typical for Mars when it is not processed. Hello, where is Daniela? I want you to provide a bit more information about what Mars represents in a psychological sense and how it is somehow connected to my sister.
Yes, as a mother of 3 children, I have extensively studied this planet, mainly from the perspective that it becomes active almost immediately after the moon. In other words, the moon is the primary driving planet that children connect with, meaning the connection with the mother. However, when the child turns 1 year old and begins to perform actions with their body, such as walking, this is an action associated with the planet Mars. At that point, the instinct for the child to be independent actually kicks in. In other words, Mars is an extremely important planet for the development of every child because it is associated with the theme of boundaries, assertiveness, and actions. And in this context, a well-developed Mars, as you mentioned, or well-channeled by Mars, is the moment when the child can actually grow up with healthy boundaries and learn to channel their energy in the right way.
Yes. So what we can say is that Mars has positions, with some being more special, and for those we will talk about the so-called dignities. But let's examine the authority of Mars in fire signs and how such a Mars would express itself. If Mars is in the sign of Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius, among these three, Mars has a very strong position in the sign of Aries because it is directly associated with the sign where it actually acts as the ruler. Therefore, there it finds its throne, position, or Mars. This is how it is known in astrology. In fact, what can it provide in terms of psychological aspects in all the fire signs?
First, let's explain that Mars, being associated with a person's actions, the element itself will show the way the child acts or what will motivate them to act. Is there a difference between the different elements in the fire sign? Mars, the child needs to be creatively stimulated, needs an impulse for action, and requires creativity. They need some external stimulus, and very often they are driven by some internal motivation of their own. But it is connected with expansion and expressiveness, and it is very important for parents to understand when they have a child with a fiery Mars that this child's actions are likely to be more expressive. In fact, fiery Mars is primarily associated with anger and aggression, and these may be children who express this aggression more. This is childhood aggression. It is not necessarily negative. It is even easier on some level, however, the very argument itself. And although the actions that would be good for the child will actually help channel this anger in the right way, and perhaps it is also good for parents to know that allowing the child to express their actions more freely would be easier for them. The problem is how this will be perceived, as here we have norms, society's rules, and so on. In other words, we need to have a slightly deeper understanding of what our actions convey.
And here we can discuss which are the most suitable sports, specifically for the archetypes themselves, starting with ensuring that this is a sign where Mars is exalted at times, but there Mars quickly loses its energy and burns out easily, so it's not a very good option for associating Mars in Aries with endurance. Rather, it should be related to some form of explosive energy, where we burst out. And I say to the kids, this is a very good Mars for track and field, specifically for sprints, track and field. Especially sprints are closely related to our archetypes. Another thing that can really align well with Mars are all sports that involve activity and the use of firearms. I say firearms because there are also air, rifles and such. The idea is that you might enroll the child in shooting. Sports when they are older, of course. The very sounds of gunfire help, how should I put it? They aid in the production of dopamine even during sports activities. This surge of dopamine is very necessary for people with Mars and in exchanges in the cloud of signs. In general, so shooting is a good option among combat sports. I emphasize sports. One of the good options is boxing. And with Mars, things are a bit different. Mars wants to stand out. Here, it's a good option for the sport to be, boom, very focused on the individual's personality, meaning the person should be known in all their glory, how should I put it, in what they are involved in. Track and field is again suitable, especially when it is personally engaging. But the idea is that there we have sports dances, especially those that fall under Latin dances, where there is a stage and a lot of performance, yes, expression. Actually, it is very important mode for it to be an individual sport. This is very much so. It's not okay for team sports, but unless they take on a very leading role, like a captain or something like that. With Mars in Sagittarius, if we have to look at it through this prism, all sports are okay. But decathlon is the best, meaning the more different. Sports are included, the better. Such types of Olympic disciplines. I've noticed, since I've worked for many years with athletes, those who have to quickly engage in trade and quite an archetype. Sagittarius develops in several different disciplines, so it's a very good thing. Horse riding, archery, which also have another connection with the Sagittarius archetype, since one of its symbols is the centaur with its chiron, one of the symbols of Sagittarius. But overall, there are no sports that aren't good for Mars in Sagittarius. It is an archetype that it has energy and, how should I say, much greater endurance, especially from Mars.
The next Mars in Aries will be Earth signs, Mars in Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn. What can you tell us from a psychological perspective about this type of Mars, Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, moving forward? This is an Earth Mars where the child needs more time to get started. Beforehand, for example, when parents are more, let's say, expressive and want something to be done quickly, this can lead to conflict, right? Meaning they might think the child is too sluggish or too slow and so on. However, what's important to know about this Mars is that children need time, meaning it's psychological. You need to give the child a bit more space so they can feel what exactly is right for them. By the way, this Mars is very progressive, very practical, meaning the child needs to see results. That is, it should be connected to some kind of result or something tangible. The ultimate goal is mostly material. It's good for them to be able to touch it, see it, and so on. These will be children who, if a parent decides to make them do something, need to be motivated with various material rewards. They might want medals and certificates, things like that. Otherwise, this is also a Mars that once it starts, the action can continue for a long time. This is a resilient Mars. Every Earth Mars is very resilient in the sense that it has the resources within itself to continue for a very long time. For example, Mars in Capricorn is exalted and in a very strong position. And actually, this is a Mars that can accomplish a huge amount of work in a very short time, structuring and organizing, or to put something into action. So this Mars is a very good Mars, as long as there is understanding towards it, and there is no pressure, meaning there should be none here. Pressure, like Liverpool's, the child, that something must be done right now and immediately, the only thing that needs to be known here is that these children have their own rhythm, and this rhythm must be respected.
Yes. So the ground Mars, if we look at it this way, regardless of whether it's in Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, or in the 2nd, 6th, and 10th houses, because the houses also are not the same. The Earth Mars is really very resilient. However, what sports would suit a Mars in Taurus. The typical example of Mars in Taurus is when we build the body, the so-called bodybuilding, and it doesn't come from us going to the gym for weight training, strengthening the body. All sports, in principle, I can somehow associate with the same type of Taurus, but specifically, bodybuilding and fitness, I would say, manifest most actively because there we also have the exercises themselves are good to be done slowly, but this is what is very slow, which is more Taurus, while Virgo, which is a mutable earth sign, there is gymnastics, there is kalanetics, there are now all forms of, how should I say, sports that require a lot of coordination. Here, by the way, billiards and archery are included, right? They are also related. They create, that is, there will be a need for a lot of precision even back in the day when I had lectures exactly on these topics. I had a student who was into curling, camping, absolutely, There she was very focused on cleaning where the stone would pass, so to speak, actually. For Virgo, it's very important to have regular activity. I repeat, it's crucial to maintain discipline and not skip it. The British are getting into dancing, at least from here. Here, with me, it will be step dancing. It's like a type of dance, like that. It's connected with the department here. And here will also be gymnastics. As we mentioned with Capricorn, it gets very interesting. There are marathons, and it's no coincidence that Mars in Capricorn is called a marathon. One type, a person is extremely resilient, and here the terrain is also connected with Mars in Capricorn. A very good option, if you have a child with such a Mars, is to take them to try climbing. You'll see that they will most likely really enjoy it. The idea here is to truly try it out and see. And in this way, you'll understand how everything works, how it's all connected with rickets. So, Mars in Capricorn, climbing is a very good option, as is any sport that requires a lot of endurance. It is connected with the archetype of the goat century. In fact, if we look at the fire and earth signs, they are the first two elements in the third element. We reach the air element, where we have Cancer, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. If we have to describe these three archetypes, what type of connection do they have with emotional maturity in children with an air chart?
Now, emotional maturity, yes. I rather associate the air Mars with intellect and with the fact that these children might not necessarily be oriented towards a specific sport or specific actions. Here the mental aspect is more prominent, and these children will be inclined towards gathering information, communicating more with other people and peers, right? Or the activities themselves might be more mental. Also, it's good for them to be more involved in collective media, even to be in groups on some social media. So here, for sure, communication will be more important for these children. And it's not necessarily because they have twins. Communication is important there too. I noticed that there are children who work very well with their fingers. They are very dexterous and can craft things very well. For example, Mars in Aquarius is oriented towards specific sciences and mental activities. Everything related to expanding their knowledge is very intellectual, and they will definitely want that. To communicate more, here the actions with Mars in air signs are at the expense of communication itself and the search for information. In Libra, they would be a bit more social and will definitely seek Mars in Libra. Also characteristic of it is that there might be a bit more conflict in friendships, and they themselves might find themselves in such situations, leaving parents wondering why their children are like that.
They get into conflicts. In fact, the air variants of Mars, the so-called air trine of Gemini, Libra, or Aquarius, as well as the 3rd, 7th, and 11th houses. If Mars is located there, how would they understand sports? If we look at the realization, here are sports in pairs, Orodamnern, so every form of tennis will be here. Badminton will also be here, and these are table sports. Here will be cycling. not the wheel from what was it wheels, and what gives us the opportunity to move. If we see this connection between Sagittarius and Gemini, two sports are related to movement. With Sagittarius we have horseback riding, and with Gemini we have cycling. Actually, both are very similar, but the difference is that one involves a wild animal and the other uses an invention in the sleeve by people, which is very Gemini-like, just followed. So for Geminis, one of the good options is really to have a sport where there is a pair. There are matches that even have a form of competition through quite, how shall we say, dynamic movements. And the other thing, which is for Libras, we also have sports, in my opinion, but here they are all tandem or with dances. So here, tango includes absolutely everything. For example, waltz, all sports dances that involve dancing in pairs. This is faster. Here, artistic gymnastics is also included. Be the one who is in the highest expression, the most beautiful, right. Here, we have every form of beauty and sport in one, so even synchronized swimming falls to some extent under the Libra archetype, and this is also a good option. And when there are large groups of people, right, this is Aquarius. Aquarius is always associated with team and group sports in the first place. The easiest analogy one can make is that Aquarius is the 11th. We can calmly say that in a team, 11 players play, which is the so-called funds. However, whether it is already broken down and there is a difference with the different types of football, but here, absolutely all team sports are included. The 11th sign, 11-a-side football, where there are teams, where there is a team, because you can have the best player in the team, but if they don't play as a team, they can't win, right? There is always that in this type of sport. Then there is the formophore. There is no specific battle being fought. Yes, actually basketball and volleyball are included here. Absolutely all American football and baseball are included, although they are still teams. But there is a lot of individual play. So baseball is very close to the lion. From there, the connection, and actually this is the visible air that will place you in Archim, which we can talk about. This is what leads here on Mars, the most interesting interest, because there is also one of the most interesting positions on the table. Actually, in the translated Mars, we have Mars in Cancer. I in Pisces, what can you tell me about it? The reflection of Mars in the child's horoscope, psychological.
Now, the most important thing about Mars in the water signs, most times, is that what drives children to action is actually emotion. In other words, if they are not emotionally connected and engaged with a given situation, it is difficult for them to start doing something. So, for them, the emotional state is very important, and accordingly, since we are talking about water and the trine of the soul with the 3 water signs, it often involves techniques of mood, or quite often some emotional states or outbursts, or even the opposite. That is, when a child is not in a good emotional state, they may have no desire to do anything. And conversely, when they are somehow on the wave, there can be an impulse. Actually, for many actions, so it depends on this as well. It might be important for parents to be able to recognize these states in their children, and when they are ready, when they truly have the desire and need to notice something within themselves. And in sports, it's the same way. For me, it's often about these states when they want or don't want to do something. That is, let's say if a child is enrolled in a particular sport, there might be moments when they don't feel like going, they don't feel like training because they don't feel well. And actually, that's the difficult part, for parents to respect, perhaps, exactly these emotional states of the children and to understand them, but there's always something else behind them. However, the moments when this child has the impulse to act, these are really very powerful moments. That is, at that time, this Mars becomes even stronger than the fiery Mars, right? Because here they are driven by emotion. Marie herself, even the very physics nowadays somehow collapses in front of the emotional states, that is, regardless of how healthy or trained the child is. In fact, emotion is leading, and actually, if we examine them,
I am halfway in agreement with your opinion on these things. Just very well said. But when it comes to water sports, they are very interesting. Otherwise, if you take it in hand, it means here the interesting thing is that Mars in Cancer also has essential dignity. But it is its weakest position, and a real Mars like that. It definitely needs channels to be one of the sports that claim to be the best for such a Mars in Cancer. This is wrestling, the classical wrestling. If we look there, we always work with holds. In the same way here, judo. All the sports that are combat sports, because some kind of fighting machine, air conditioning, video, this is an archetype that is quite aggressive when determined. And actually here are combat sports and martial arts that are related to holds, immobilizations, locks, and so on. But here they also look at water sports. Here I am with Jaws, yes indeed. With Scorpio, things are already more extreme. And during Scorpio for Cancer, it's important that all fashion archetypes are well connected with any form of water, and without sports, water sports like Pisces as an archetype are most inclined towards all. According to you, was there, while Mars in Cancer has a lot of sports aggression, a community in sports aggression, and some of the greatest boxers in the world have this type of Mars. The other thing is, Mars in Scorpio, on the other hand, is very, very extreme. With Mars in Scorpio, we have extreme sports, and many people will say that those involved in extreme sports are reckless. That's not true. In fact, people who engage in any kind of extreme sport are usually quite careful about what they do. They need adrenaline. They primarily need what is called thrill stimulation. And that's why Scorpio sports are associated with all kinds of stunt skills, including skateboarding and snowboarding. Here, bungee jumping is also considered a sport, and it's a good way to get the adrenaline pumping. But here, Barbard, are absolutely all the sports that require very, very fine work with the heart, and here it is. Dwelling. Here is Krav Maga, which is also an Israeli martial art that is quite extreme. That is Wing Chun as well, those from Eco like my art with the scorpion. Absolutely all water sports where it's classic warm in the lee, where the Balkan games are, where windsurfing and everything related to the model. Really when the kids, they actively choose a sport that gets the job done. They can channel their Mars much more easily. Where do you envision your Mars? They will have a much greater sense of direction and actions. They will feel more energetic. And for me, I would say that one of the most important things is really to try this and observe how the child reacts. It will make an impression on you. I have quite a bit of experience in this area with many clients.
practicing this really has great success. If the sport is approached correctly, because the most important thing about sports is not to win medals and work, but health exactly, and also to channel Dodiat, the anger of each archetype, because both the fiery, the earthly, the airy, and the watery Mars. Since Mars is associated as a principle with anger and aggression, the way it is channeled will actually help the child to develop good boundaries for themselves, meaning the ability of every child as an adult to say no. Sports actually help a lot with this. For the child to grow up with good and healthy boundaries. I think this is one of the most important messages. And it's not just about sports, of course, but also for parents to be able to understand the abilities of each child and what they have come with and their potentials.
Yes, very well. I hope you found the information interesting, and if you have any suggestions, please write to us. As we mentioned, we are creating a segment specifically for children and how to support their development through astrology and human design. So, that was it from us until next time. If you have any ideas, please write them in the comments. And subscribe. So, that's it from us. Goodbye until next time.